Hi everyone, it's Zach with Palantir Research. I am so sorry. Looks like my stream crashed. Test, test, test. Hello, Aeon Electronics. I see you there. I was actually talking for the last couple minutes here without my mic, so I was not even realizing that my audio was not even being picked up. So good thing I noticed that. But just put a 1 in the chat. I know this is my original stream crashed there. So, oh, good morning there. Thank you, Nolan. So I'll just share it right now on the screen just so it's easier to show what kind of happened. So my original stream crashed, so I had to delete that out, and then I replaced it and reset up everything again here. So I know some folks may be sitting in that older one there, but I did delete that. So this is now the most current one here for the live stream for this week. Thank you all for joining, especially on a busy holiday week that we had, I'd say, at least price-wise and even news-wise leading up to Thanksgiving for those in the U.S. But yeah, I do have the agenda up for today. Let's get that. So yeah, it may sound repetitive here, but just for those who are new to the live streams, I tend to not, or at least I go to a little bit more detail on the news that happened throughout the week. And it's not necessarily repeating information there because I do want to cover a little bit different stuff or go into more depth. So today I do want to go over the NHS contract, of course. I know we've kind of talked about this to death, but there's some things that I didn't cover in my own videos. I know other content creators might have, but I want to go through the Palantir perspective, more specifically on their blog post, as well as Alex Karp's quote on the actual PR from the NHS. Now, for the top AI company, this actually happened over the weekend. So I do want to just at least talk through that a little bit. And I kind of just mentioned that Palantir's number 2 and then some of their competitors that are recognized in the weekly video. So check that out if you just kind of want a quick note on those, but we'll talk about that as well. And then insider selling. Yes, the big thing that everyone says, they're doom and gloom, or the opposite, like it doesn't matter. So from my perspective, it's just what happens, right? It happens anywhere, but it doesn't mean that you put your head in the sand. So we'll talk about insider selling. I'll do a Form 4 walkthrough. I think some folks might find that useful, and I'll use a different example than Alex Karp. We'll use Shyam Sankar today. I just think it's easy to walk through there and really show that you have the tools for next time yourself to really check that out and understand what's happening. And then we'll talk a little bit about price action. I think it's pretty important actually with this upcoming week here. We did test some support lines and didn't go through, and we had some resistance as well throughout the week. If you take a very far back look on that price action on the daily chart, you'll see that. And then what's next? I think this is what a lot of people are thinking about now, especially after the NHS contract. That was a big catalyst people were thinking about. And I think it's still good here to get some risk off, right? We have an idea of what has happened now. They've won, they're embedded. Now, what's the next thing that people care about? So let's just get into it here. And for those who are just joining, I see that there's more and more concurrent viewers coming up here. Good morning to Tom as well. Thank you. I see you guys in the chat here. Oh, for some reason, I don't think it loads on this side, so I might have to figure that out why it's delayed there. But either way, let's get to the screen share here. And for those who are just joining, yeah, we're doing the Sunday live stream here, and the agenda was just played a second ago. But if you check out the weekly video that I put out, it kind of does that very quick dissemination of that information there that we've seen. And let's just get into it. So the first agenda item we have was NHS England. NHS in general winning the contract and Palantir's perspective. So for those who need a quick refresher, we got 7 years at 330 million. So this is totally different than what we were kind of expecting. And I did put in my previous videos on the UK government's contracting website. They did have as well 480 million total, possibly over 7 years, or it was 360 million for the first 5, and then they had the 12 plus 12, so potentially up to 40 million. Now we got something different here, and that's fine, and it's possible because that actual piece that was referenced was actually closed in February of 2023. So I did talk about those in previous videos here, and I think it caught some investors by surprise. I think qualitatively, though, it's still nice to win a large government contract, showing that Palantir, even with the huge campaign against them, and if you've been following it, I don't know if most companies can deal with that kind of PR pressure, but we know Palantir pretty much sticks to their guns, and it's easy when you're not flip-flopping, right? When you already know what your mission is, what you're going to do, you don't have to worry about necessarily your image because your image is just going to follow whatever you've been doing already since it's been the same. So just let me know if you agree or disagree with that. But let's see. I got a quick, let's see. Did Palantir get the entire contract or only parts of it? Yeah, so that's a good question too. And this was actually known information, most likely, that they were going to share this with other people. Now, the extent of how much, we don't know. So we have this listed here. So Palantir, I like they put them as first, right? Group led by Palantir Technologies. And this is just my speculation then, that they're kind of the one, right? The federated data platform, they are tying it together, and they've done a lot of this work and spearheaded it. And they are the one getting the most PR, I guess, from this, but also the most bashing from those groups. But in addition, they're going to have support from Accenture, PwC, NECS, and Cardinal Ferrar. So the extent of how much they're getting from this, we don't know. And from my perspective here, most likely, and that's just from the names here, Palantir is most likely going to be the the technology side of it, it sounds like, but then actual implementation. So just because you have a new platform, you don't just implement it and people just have it, right? So you're going to rely on documentation, creating that, and then also training and making sure that the different kind of training that's available. So you have clinical staff, you have administrative staff, and then you're also going to have, well, I guess clinical is going to be broken down to many levels, right? You're going to have physicians, but you're also going to have techs, and then you're going to have people who do, let's say that if you're a tech for an MRI machine, yeah, there's someone who runs it, but there's also someone who fixes it, sets it up as well. It's not all one person. So there's a lot of people at play here and a lot of things that we don't think about when it comes to implementing such a large solution across something as complicated as the NHS, because now we're taking it from just NHS England and maybe different trusts that had pilots, but now we're doing it across the whole thing here. And you got to get everyone on the same page, especially if you're getting the data on the same page. The goal here is to have some form of standardization, meaning that we all see the same thing, right? So if I see a patient out in Chelsea, Westminster as a physician, and then they have a certain diagnostic code that I had to put for them. Now, if that person had to go to an outpatient clinic for some other reason, they need the physician over there needs to be able to know that happened at some point, because it can lead to a faster diagnosis to if it's related or non-related. So that's just a very simplified example. So thank you all for joining here. I do see a few of you trickling in, just talking about the NHS here. And I just like popping. I haven't actually started what I wanted to on the live stream agenda here. I just wanted to talk about the Palantir perspective, since we've talked a lot about the NHS, the deal itself, and all those things there. And for some reason, I'm moving this around. But thank you all for joining. So back to it here. So I didn't cover this in my original coverage. So the important thing now that Palantir has essentially won, right? And we've seen the PR campaign against them still continue with like, oh, they're trying to have people opt out. I know it's inaccurate there, but you know, in the main kind of vast, basically in the whole internet out there's a lot of information, and for the everyday normal people that don't necessarily care about the small details here, because we're investors, we care about Palantir, we want to see how this plays out. But for normal everyday people that have no stake in Palantir, say you're a UK citizen, you don't necessarily know what's happening in the back end of the NHS, regardless of who won. And then you're just getting flooded with, oh, opt out of your data here. Palantir is a spy company, you know. So just a lot of that stuff happening. So that's kind of the job of what Palantir has to do today and going forward, while they're still doing the implementation and that other work needed with the NHS. So right now, I just highlighted a few points here. So Alex Karp loves to point out, right, they've been in this for 20 years. And it's for the most important kind of institutions around the world. This is for the governments that handle, especially on the military side, essentially the lives of people, right? And if you have any errors, or if you have a way of, let's say your security gets compromised in some way, and this is of course relevant to the NHS kind of conversation, then I think it's important that Alex Karp continues to tout their reputation, the years of time that they've been doing in this field. And of course, healthcare might be a relatively recent vertical in terms of the company itself and the lifetime of that. However, it doesn't mean that just because you've been developing it for the military, it's not applicable to healthcare. I would say it's much more in that case, because you have an outsider's perspective, and now you're able to at least do the things that are overlapping there, like a Venn diagram, right? Healthcare has its own thing. Military has its own as well. And then there's obviously a lot of similarities in terms of data protection, as well as just what's at stake, right? People's lives. And this is for normal people as well. So you could even argue that healthcare is much more important. So, and then the other thing that he brings up in his quote here. So remember, this is on NHS England's PR. So this is intentional. What Palantir and, of course, Alex Karp wanted to make sure was put out there for people. So he talks about the first use case of the privacy-enhancing technology. So this is supposed to be nationally assured, so the UK side, and it's a funded privacy tool, so it's for all NHS organizations here. And the thing that you want to know is that this is supposed to meet the NHS's highest technical standards for security, and that's for managing patient data. And then this is going to be supported by information governance and data protection processes. Now, when I hear information governance and data protection processes, essentially that's people saying this is the process that we're doing to ensure that. So there's going to be human elements to this, and nothing is perfect. If you've ever worked in any, even if not in data or in anything of that sort, say that you interact with analysts or a data integration team or anything of that sort, and you're a business person, you still have to worry about data governance and data protection. And it could be as simple as not looking at scam emails, right? Those phishing emails that come up there. But that's just something to be aware of here. So there's going to be the highest technical standards, but it still has to be supported by people. And that's kind of what Palantir also touts as well, right? That they have systems in place. It's I forgot what exact wording for it. It's in the next article, but the access controls there. So this is important to note because everyone has that narrative that Palantir is, they're going to steal your data, whatever. But there's actually a lot of parts at play here. So the NHS PET, that's run separately from the FDP, and the suppliers are deliberately different here. So they put that it's independent service, so they want to make sure that there's at least if someone were to read this article, I'm not sure if everyday normal people would ever read this, but essentially they just want to make sure that Palantir's not running this NHS PET. So, and that winner here is announced below IQVIA for the NHS PET contract. So that's a 3-year deal with options to extend. So they have a different time frame as well. So it just kind of adds more convolution, I guess if that's a word, to the whole 330 million pounds to 7 years. But essentially, Palantir is really now the focus of this, and I think this is the correct way to go about, is when they have an opportunity, not necessarily flood the gates with all this information, but you really want to make sure that people understand that, and this is really based off people really looking at this stuff themselves, but really want to make sure that there's a separation. And this is common actually for a lot of organizations. And they announce it usually too, like, it's protected because even though one person's running this, the other person's running that. There's of course pros and cons to that. You know, if you have everyone running under the same platform, you're assuming that it's going to be more streamlined and standardized. However, the cons is that control, or at least from what people see, they think that Palantir has full control. So this is something that Alex Karp importantly did point out. Now, Palantir also, and I don't think regular ordinary people are going to read this as well, but they released as well on the day of when they won. And I kind of didn't go over this when the initial breaking news video, but this was important too for Palantir to continue. So in addition to what Alex Karp said on the article itself, so for those who are actually more interested in kind of getting more of the philosophy here, I'm not going to go through the whole article, but it's not too long as a blog post. But essentially, it points out the different pieces of information that really points to Palantir as a responsible, I would say, from their history, as well as what kind of company that they are, to be one to at least have a chance to run the FDP here. And this is actually huge to educate the public because, you know, on an everyday normal thing, we're used to our data being sold. And I mean, I guess a lot of people's tolerance for that is not really, it is pretty high actually, because we're used to getting ads and things of that nature, but that's not Palantir's business model at all, and it doesn't make sense for their kind of business. They're a software company, so they're going to build a software that enables them in order to use their data. So they don't need the data in order for them to make money, because they're not selling it to, like, say, a pharmaceutical company. That's not how they make money. They're getting money because the person actually wants to use their data, and that's who's funding them, the NHS. So that should be already enough here, but they just want to make sure that they kind of beat a dead horse. But Palantir is a data processor. They're not the controller. And they want to make sure they do not and cannot reuse or transfer their customers' data for their own purposes. And as they mentioned, this would be against their contract, especially with their government clients. That's a big thing to point out. and that would undermine the whole thing of their business. You know what I mean? As that's the first point. That's not their business of selling data or transferring it out. So I think it's really important here that even though I'm an investor and I have more motivation to read this stuff, slowly, I think, at least if you do a Google search for Palantir, hopefully at some point this ranks higher than some article about Peter Thiel, Donald Trump backing, the typical stuff that we always see, spy company. So, and then also, even though they have a philosophy of their own company, they already have a proven track record. So they've been around at least for a couple decades. And we know the start, right, with some CIA funding and things of that nature. But, everyone has to get their start somewhere. And people don't know about why they were building these in the first place. They want to be able to track terrorism without infringing on everyday normal Americans, right? And you can argue there's right or wrong ways to do that, but at least for Palantir's philosophy, this eventually led to a purpose-based access control. So they have a whole article here, and I guess that's not the subject of today's live stream, but if you want to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it, they have a whole thing here. And this has been around for a while, just so you guys know. This has been around since 2020, so it has been available to people. So important to keep that out. And I love how they put the links here because, why do extra work here? And essentially all you need to know is that this is a way that organizations can control their data in such a way that, so I guess they probably explained it much better than I could do it myself, but they ensure that individuals with an organization are only granted access to information that they need to do their job. So if you worked at certain companies, and this isn't from my own experience as well as a professional, at least in healthcare data, sometimes it's just, they give you access. Let's just say they change your database access to read write. And then that's it. There's someone manually just updating it for you, and they don't necessarily have that. I mean, there's other products as well that do this, and you can put timeframes for that, and then you can also just do it role-based, right? So you don't have to put individuals as well, but if I'm assigned a certain role, then I just get the access of that, and if my role changes over time. So there's different ways that you can attack this, but essentially they have purpose-based access controls here to ensure that. Now, also, I think the more important thing to see is that at any point, an auditor can understand not just who has access to what data, but also why they were given access. So this is pretty big. And, a lot of the times if you're in a rudimentary organization, I'm not trying to knock anyone, it's kind of the same thing as I mentioned in that previous example. You're kind of just getting someone in maybe IT or someone who controls that database. Maybe it's an architect there, but either way, they might not have the documentation trail of why this person was given access when, and then for how long, for what purpose. So sometimes it's easy if he's going to be an analyst anyway, so he'll have access to everything, then that's, I guess, fine in the general sense of things. But if things change over time, or if the way the data governance structure has changed, how is that being controlled? So Palantir is built in the way that, at least for the NHS purposes, this should have a documentation trail as well, and they will be subject to audits, I'm assuming, to measure their performance. So, oh wow, we have a bunch more people here on the live stream. Thank you all. It looks like we have 50 concurrent. I know I've been talking about the same subject for a while, but I think it's important because this is what Palantir has been doing. But we are on NHS Palantir's perspective right now, so this is important to me, at least, because I didn't necessarily cover it on the daily videos here in the deal itself. And this is actually what I think is going to play a role further down the line, just because even though you've won the contract, it's been announced to everyone, and everyone, I would assume, would just kind of give up. But it looks like they're really trying to get people to the big misinformation of opting out there. Good morning, James. Oh, and sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat for a couple of it. But yeah, Christopher, thank you for joining. James, if you want to just say good morning, hope you all had a good Thanksgiving. I know if not a lot of you may not be from the United States, but watching with one eye open. Yeah, I know I do the live streams pretty early. Sometimes I just put my phone right next to my ear if I'm trying to fall asleep at night. So I know it's not necessarily the most healthy thing, but glad to join at least auditory wise for you guys. So, and yeah, from where I was here, I was just talking about the protection and security, and if that's not enough for you, I mean, sometimes by proxy. Good morning, Blake, as well. Same. Oh, thank you, everyone. Yeah, it looks like I should have shouted out everyone in the chat to say hi in the beginning, but thank you all. Yeah, it's Sunday early morning for me, at least in the Midwest. We have snow, which is unfortunate for me because I just don't like driving in the snow when it's coming down. But But yeah, back to where I was. Palantir strives to help critical institutions solve complex challenges. So another big part of this PR for Palantir is to make sure that, yes, we won the contract, and for good reason. Why did we win? Not saying this is the only reason you win, but we have a track record. We've helped critical institutions solve complex and important challenges here. And this is important because not everyone steps up to the plate here. Oh, Ming Tong, thank you from Singapore. Oh, sorry, you just deleted it. Sorry. I didn't know if you want everyone to know that, but I just wanted to bring that up. But yeah, sorry. But around the world, they are doing important things. And we've seen these, and I've covered actually a few of, I think I've covered all these at some point in some videos. Sorry, I don't have specific references, but yeah, the World Food Program, I believe they put a dollar amount. It was around like $500,000 that they've saved. And this is important because you're working with multiple suppliers, and the level of, actually, you can even click on the link here, but the level that they are working together with Palantir, I'm sure it varies. So you're coordinating a lot of players here. And I think the big thing that they were doing was they were trying to use artificial intelligence to figure out where are there going to be shortfalls in crop yields. And that is huge because if you can direct or maybe at least save a day or two in food shipments just because you have an idea of where it's going to happen, I think that's a really big thing that'll happen, that'll compound on itself over time, right? And yeah, you save a few days here, you save a few days there, but this is people's lives, right, when it comes to food. And the better and better that you get at predicting crop yields, the better you can predict where do you want to ship things, where do you want to get people ready, where do staff need to be ramped up, as well as where do the shipments need to go and all that. So, but resettlement of Ukraine, also big. I've covered this. I know the UK has given money to Palantir for this work as well. And then war crimes. Oh, of course. So a lot of work with Ukraine here. But essentially the point is that Palantir wants regardless of your politics, right? If you're in the UK, if you see something like this, I'm assuming that you know these are complex problems, even just at face value. You don't have to get into the weeds to understand that. And you're working around the world with different institutions, lots of levers there. And Palantir has been doing this. So, and they do want to. I'm not sure how I fully feel about this when they share their pandemic help here, because I don't know if that actually is or is not a sensitive subject for UK folks. And it really depends. So even the United States, because people think of, oh, they're helping with the pandemic, they're just trying to force people with vaccinations, right? And we'll leave that up to debate. You guys, I'm not a healthcare expert, but there's basically sensitivity around that. So I think at least as a supply chain issue, yeah, the pandemic is literally one of the best kind of cases you can put as complex and worldwide, an important challenge here, because every large institution, small, big, government, private, they had to deal with certain issues here. And even if you're a non-related field, where your staff having to be sent home for remote work, there's a lot of things at play here. But yeah, long story short, if we go to the live stream agenda, that I think that's the important part for NHS and Palantir for their perspective going forward. They really need to continue touting their reputation, what they do. But the best thing they can do, of course, in the future when they have a chance is share quantitative results. So we'll see if that actually comes to play. And I don't know if the motivation from the NHS, if they have any timeline on that and what kind of things they want to tout out there, because it's going to be important on what specific trials that they do, because I've even pointed out in NHS England, they like to talk about new programs. Oh, let me just bring it up here. They like to talk about the new programs that they've been using, and some of them are obviously part of the FDP, and they even reference it sometimes. It's in the news section. Right here. So I did make a video on one of them specifically just because it was a few NHS pilots that they wanted to use when they were expanding the COVID platform here. So I think this is important that we point these things out. Now, let's move on to the next agenda item. So we have top AI company Everest Group. So this happened over the weekend. Oops, switching back and forth for you all. And let me just take a look at the chat really quick. Oh, USA here. Thanks, Christopher, for dropping by. We got Germany. Yes, you were here this morning, but it's later in the day for you guys. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me on a Sunday, right? And this, for everyone, it's a holiday weekend too, at least in the United States. I know that a lot of us might be going back to work on Monday, so we just kind of want to relax. And if that's the point here, I don't know. It's just cool that I'm just some random dude out here in Chicago and people want to listen to what I have to say. So now the second agenda item, we have Everest Group. So they unveiled their inaugural. So this is their first time, I'm assuming, their artificial intelligence top 50. Now, the reason why they put this out, I'm just going to say it's most likely good for them to cover something like this, because if artificial intelligence is going to have the next big TAM coming up, or total addressable market, and they want to get in on this, right? They want to build up a reputation, especially as years come, right? By 2030, this will be 7 years of them making a list, right? They want to build up that reputation as, oh, we know who's in and who's out, and they're the ones who are in charge of the it list, right? So Palantir will continue, and I have no doubts about this. Palantir will continue to show up on these kind of lists as more and more get made, or more established one. We've talked about Forrester. There's a bunch of others. Yeah, I made videos on them as well. So, putting it at the top of my head. But yeah, you just go to the channel if you're interested in those. But at least from what they're touting from their side, and this is a quote, AI is basically the it thing right now to do. And they're saying there's more than 5,000 AI technology providers in the past decade alone by their estimates. And then they want to at least help the public and, of course, potential businesses of the top 50. That's going to help enterprises identify their largest, most well-funded, and relatively scaled up AI-first companies, so that they can do all the heavy lifting for them. So over time, they want to establish their reputation, essentially, that they're important. Now, the cool part, Palantir's on the list. The not cool part, they're number 2. I mean, 2's pretty good, right? 2's pretty good. And if you're going by reputation and just well known, okay, I get you. OpenAI, they made it accessible for everyday people. So they captured the imagination of what AI can do, even though it's a chat GPT, right? And there's definitely a lot more that you can do on the back end of things, especially in terms of automations and even decision trees, honestly. That's the biggest thing here. But essentially, Palantir is number 2, and you'll see some familiar names here. And I believe DataRobot was also a number 1 in the last one that I covered for Palantir. I'd have to double check that, but there was another, I think it was Dresner, right? They had their marketing list, and DataRobot was also number 1. So I do have to take a deeper look at them as well. Gong. Yeah. So just randomly saying things. But so the key highlights too that they wanted to make sure that we knew about. So the U.S., and this is not surprising, the United States hosts the most AI technology providers, 70% of their list. And there's more, though, coming globally, and this should not be a surprise, with China with the biggest population in the world, of course. So they're going to also have the biggest amount of enterprises, since the percentage is based off the amount, not necessarily dollars or anything of that sort. Because if we go by dollars, I think Palantir will probably be number 1, but that was that old 2021 report, I believe. So we'll see how, with Microsoft Fabric coming out as well, how that's going to affect what's categorized as artificial intelligence. Oh, wait, no. Am I just confusing Fabric, AI? Okay, I'll have to double check, but because I see it more as a Foundry equivalent there, but the way that people count artificial intelligence revenue is going to vary. It's not necessarily cut and dry there. So just so you're aware. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out here, privately held versus publicly held, and this is important here, because if you have 82% as privately held and 18% as publicly held, so we know the valuation on these guys here. And of course, Palantir is publicly traded. We know their valuation. And when it comes to privately held companies, this is where volatility comes in. And the other thing to note, too, regulation-wise, not everything is going to be subject to be told to the public, right? Because you're a privately held company, you're held to a different standard than a publicly traded company. So something to keep in mind here, if the ratio of higher privately held companies is still much larger than to public. So over time, I would assume this should even out. Not saying like over time, like in a year or two, like over time, like I'd say into the 2030s, as more and more companies become established and they are like a straight up AI player. There's a lot of things that can change right now. Let me just take a look at the chat. I think, this is extremely difficult to assess right now, but I think Palantir is overvalued right now, even I don't think it has a great future. Yeah, and this is kind of what is related to these lists here in terms of volatility and uncertainty of the future. And this happens with any kind of new market coming out. If you wanted to get in on the cloud computing game or cloud storage game or whatever you want to talk, this is back then, right? And I don't know how young my audience is or isn't. I'd have to double check on my YouTube. But essentially, there's a lot of volatility that happens early on in these markets, right? You have huge players that can fly up, but then also can disappear over time. And I'm not saying that Palantir is more likely to disappear or anything of that sort. I mean, if you just look at the balance sheet, there's no way of them disappearing unless someone just really blows money, right? But either way, just paying attention to this private versus public is important. And then especially when it comes to valuations, when people talk about that, things can get inflated in the private and, of course, in the public market, but everyone sees that. But in the private held market, that's much harder to track there, especially with different fundings. Now, Everest Group has documented a noticeable trend of decreasing time to unicorn status for AI. So this is also related to that privately held company here in valuations. So essentially, if you're a unicorn, you're worth $1 billion. Now, doesn't mean you have $1 billion or you're making close to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. It just means you're valued at that status. Especially in a private market, you can say that certain things can be forgiven if the potential is there and if money needs to be parked somewhere. Because if you can get in when you're worth $1 billion and companies are now trying to hit trillion-dollar statuses eventually in a decade or hundreds of billions of dollars as the new status quo, I think when I was a kid, I remember that reaching 100 billion for a company was pretty crazy, let alone $1 trillion that we're seeing now, and we have multiple companies at that valuation. So when we see quadrillion, I don't know. I'll probably be retired, hopefully. So, but that's what I wanted to cover with Palantir, at least at the top 50 list here. They're number 2, but do keep in mind these lists have their different metrics here that they talk about, and then I really wanted to make sure people knew about the private versus public part of this, because this should change over time, and it may change the competitive landscape for Palantir. So going back to the agenda here. All right, insider selling. This is the fun one. And no doom and gloom here, guys. I'm literally just do insider selling because that's what they post. I try to see myself, Palantir Research, as more of a reporting side of things. I obviously have my built-in biases, right? But when it comes to these, information is just out there, so people need to know it regardless if you're a bear or a bull or you're just someone contemplating knowing what Palantir is all about. So yeah, next stimulus I saw in the chat here, next stimulus, I'm going to cover that probably near the end just because it brings everything together. But yeah, stay tuned for that. I promise not to drag on too much with all the things I'm saying, especially on insider selling. Let's be clear here. There's nothing crazy happening. And I think what's important today is to walk through a Form 4. I'm not sure how advanced or how new certain investors are who watch my channel, but Form 4s, they may look intimidating. I know any SEC filing can look intimidating, especially the basic black and white, and then all these little numbers and boxes, and you kind of just have to take your time and look through it. But once you've seen a few over time, it pretty much is straightforward. And I like to think of these as like a receipt, but you get the running total along the way each part. So let's just talk about insider selling in that context today. So I've been talking about Alex Karp on the previous videos here. So if you have been looking at the channel, I made a video and it did focus on Alex Karp because I think that's the most important. I mean, in terms of amount of shares held. So he has Class A, Class B, restricted stock units, RSUs. But let's do Shyam Sankar just so we can change it up a little bit here. And he's still very important, right, as CTO. And he still has, I'd say, good amount of holdings, at least compared to an everyday person. It's worth tons of money. And he actually has a good example here of variance on it. So it's a good example. So top of the page, I don't think this needs to really be explained. But yeah, basic information, who's it for, what company, the date. So nothing out of the ordinary here. Now, I think where people might get a little bit confused is that things happen, and I think it should be easier for me to zoom. Let's see. Okay, I zoom it a little bit. I know these are small numbers, guys, but please bear with me. So let's just look at it like a receipt. So just keep note, this is for the Class A common stock here, and then the dates, they are coming down and going upwards. So you're reading it from top to bottom, just so you know. And we'll talk about this, but it's kind of similar, but it's just for the derivative securities. But this is for the non-derivative securities, so Class A common stock that can be sold on the open market. So here we have the first line item, and we don't have to go through every single one, but first one here, we have C. So the SEC has a bunch of codes here. You can literally just Google it. And then if you look up C, conversion of derivative security. Okay, that sounds pretty familiar to what a derivative security is here. So just so we have a reference point, 99,537 was converted. So he acquired a 99,537 common common stock, but it was acquired through here, 99,537 here, because it was converted from Class B to A. Now, what happened here? So it changed his count. So from whatever it was previously, it added. So if we just do quick subtraction, we'll find out what the original number is. Now, what happened when he got this stock, and there's things that happened. He sold stock that he already had, as well as the stock. I mean, it's a running total, so it's whatever you want to look at it as. But essentially, S here. So if we go back to S, just to show everyone, open market or private sale of non-derivative or derivative security. So that's what happened. It was a sale here of 155,000 Class A shares at this price. So D means it's going to be disposed of. And then the count went down here. So then if you keep going through each line item, you get pluses and minuses. And essentially, you end up at your last total here, 752. Now, keep in mind, this one here, this one is slightly different. I think it's a good example that this shows what was owned direct for Shyam Sankar. So this is under his name. Now, I means indirect, so family members, most likely spouses or other people. I think in his case, actually, it's pretty interesting. So if you go to footnote 9, these shares were held on record by Sankar Irrevocable. So it's a trust, essentially. And I believe these are being donated at one point. I'll have to double check. There's one point where he's donating some. But essentially, yeah, this is just being held indirectly here. Now, if you want to look at the derivatives, so Class B, I believe for the structure of Palantir, these you don't sell in the open market. These have 10 votes per share. So if you want to get money from this, if you're an insider like this, you have to convert them to Class A. And these, at least from what I'm seeing, do not have exercisable dates, so they can do this whenever. So sorry to hop around here because it's all little text, but if you see exercisable date here, number 2, this is Class B common stock. It's convertible into Class A. And then it's for a 1-for-1, but it has no expiration. So for these kind of insiders, you'll get used to it. But other people, you don't necessarily have to see these derivatives here. So I hope that made it really easy. It's literally just look at it line by line. And if you just care about like the ending numbers after the transaction takes place, then you just have to spell it out for the SEC. And keep in mind, this is Form 4. Form 4 has to be filed within 2 business days of the actual transaction. So if you see on Palantir's website, you'll have these bunch of statements of changes in beneficial ownership. This is Form 4, but they happen after. So like you'll see the actual report of the proposed sale, and then a few days later, or sometimes the same day of, these will show up. But it's within 48 hours for the SEC, so you don't want to run into any issues there. So I'm glad I was able to do this, and I think the biggest thing that people need to pay attention to is the explanation of responses, because yes, people sell for tax purposes, and that's important. Right here, it literally says tax withholding obligations in connection to the vesting. And a lot of the other insiders had this as well. Not every single share is being sold for that purpose, of course. So if you look at that, that's going to be noted as 1. And all these transactions are associated with that and the conversion and sales. Then we have also 6 and 8. So if we just look really quickly at this, so this is part of a series of transactions. They did the conversion from B to A, and then they sold it, but they made sure to do it under their trading plan here, essentially because they're insiders, so you don't necessarily want them timing the market there. And then 8, oh yeah, here's what I was talking about. So 8, this is a gift of shares, so for a tax exempt to a charity here. So if we go back to 8, this is a kind of an interesting one, just because you don't see it all the time. Yeah, negative 75,000 shares here. These were directly owned. These were donated to that charity. And I believe it's for his late father as well. Yeah, of the reporting person's late father. So that's, but since he's an insider here, you can't just give it away without telling the SEC. So I hope that was very useful for you folks, because I didn't want to talk about insider selling and necessarily the philosophy of happening it. After a big run up like this, you're going to see insiders at any company, and what you should care about mostly is the proportion of what is being sold, right? If you see someone selling out 100%, right, and that's, let's say it's Alex Karp, and this is, remember, this is all like a random scenario that I do not foresee, then I would say, okay, that's kind of messed up. We'll have to dig further at the very least, if not, be very worried at some point when you see that. But you got to look at the context of the company, what's happening as well, and things of that nature. So, I mean, what was kind of interesting is that it all happened right now during the NHS contract when it was announced, but looking at the proportions of sales for the big people at least. So I know some other folks sold out all their shares, but they're not the same level of like if Shyam Sankar or if Alex Karp sold out. So just something important there. Thank you all for looking through the nitty gritty details of the Form 4 and hope this helps you for the future when more insider sales forms come out. I don't know, of course, when that's going to happen. It could be like Monday, obviously, or it could happen down the line if we have another run up or something else happens. So, and I just really want to emphasize, please look at the explanation of responses here. Now let's go back to the agenda. Now what's next? Price action. So I think this is very interesting from last weekend. And these are daily candles, especially on the weekly videos. I like to see what has happened in context to the long-term kind of price action here. And this is all I pretty much need to know or care about as a longer-term investor, not a day trader. I'm not like looking for making money on those 15-minute candles or those 1-minute candles, right? So for me, so just keep in mind, if you're a trader or if you have some other philosophy or other way to make money, just bear in mind this is what I like looking at. So at simple price action volume, we can see, and it's obvious here, and it's all spelled out. If we just take a 6-month view, so you can see that original run up to the $20 here. I know it's very exciting for a lot of investors, but essentially we're kind of at that point again here. We've tested it to see if it's going to hold as support, and boom, Friday. So keep in mind, Friday was a half day, so important to note that out. 15-second candles, that'd be hilarious. Thanks for that, Blake. But yeah, so Friday, if you were paying attention, so these are interesting days, right? This is a half day, it's not a full day. A lot of people, especially in the financial industry, probably took that day off here. So you can think a lot of retailers were around this time. So I don't know how I feel about this specific candle that happened on Friday, but at least for what, yeah, exactly, half volume day. That's what I would think about it as well. So just remember, this is a holiday for those who aren't in the U.S. There. And it's interesting that they have it open. So Thanksgiving is off, so that's the Thursday, and then Friday is a half day. My brother actually has to work on that day. It's interesting because he has to deal with the market. But just simple price action, right? We can see this in the long-term kind of perspective here. It was denied as a resistance point at 19, and then that was very troublesome when we had this initial run-up after earnings, right? And it looks like we may be testing that again here if we like to take this candle here, because we are already kind of, so the support is not necessarily on $20. Of course, psychologically it is, but this was kind of where the support was, the mid-19 range, and I'll be interested to see if we have a candle close up above that using this as support. Now, if you look at the long-term trend, I'm just using Yahoo, but if you draw this here, I'm not very good at oh, it's okay, whatever. I don't feel like figuring this out right now. But essentially, long-term rise white, and if you look at the angle here, is this something that we're going to bounce off and use as support? Or is this something going forward in the next week that we're going to test again $20 as resistance? Or are we going to go back down and break at least the trend that's been happening the past couple weeks? So price action wise, this has been very interesting. And on my daily Palantir videos, I know if you guys, not everyone has that same cup of tea or wants to watch that, because I do the weekly videos and I also do the Sunday live stream, but I also do the daily videos. But pretty much the daily videos, I look at that simple price action on the day there. And we do talk about like those psychological points, as well as where those points of resistance and support were happening. So, but I really like looking at this long-term perspective here, because for someone who has a longer-term time frame and you're not necessarily price sensitive to purchasing or selling stock at such, I guess, at specific cent points, so you have a bigger range there. Daily candles are nice to see. Now, I think what everyone probably cares about then, because it's in relation to the price. Oh my goodness, I was talking this whole time. I didn't look at the chat. I was not sharing my screen with the chart. Oh, so sad. Visually, just imagine this was happening when I was talking about it. But yeah, we have the resistance points and the support points here. We're going to be testing out if 19 is going to hold because of the lines here. It's obvious. But then we're also going to see if 20. You don't have the screen on with what you're trying. I know, it's so sad. I just realized, guys, in the chat. So it'll switch soon, but yeah, that's my bad. I have to do a better job of that. And now I'm just going to skip now to the next thing because this is probably what's important. What is next? So I think the easiest thing to talk about, and I could leave this price up here because that's what I was talking about. But thanks, Henry, for pointing that out. But what is happening next for Palantir? So we already got this NHS stuff done with, and that's glad, right? And pretty much the rest of this is just monitoring how that deal is going about, and eventually we'll get some information about if it's working, if it's not working, and if there's any pushback of that. Now, the next point so people, this is what I'm mixed about S&P inclusion, because this is new in regards to F shares being shared. And let me just do S&P Alex Carp. I like bringing this up because we need to remember that this is still relatively new, that Palantir is going to be able to join the S&P. And the significance, of course, was this having management push around, try to get profitability. We've done that for the last 4 quarters. We are now GAAP profitable cumulatively, as well as each individual quarter. So that's important to note. But S&P and 500, what we've been seeing, at least on the institutional side, and I've talked about this probably a couple weeks ago, this has been trending up. So that's good if that's what you care about, right? Instability of the price. And that can be pretty interesting if you look at like a daily trading view and you see maybe a huge spike in volume at certain price points. Because typically, right, if you're a huge institution, you can't just put in a market order for your huge amount of money. You're going to have trading blocks that happen, and they're going to happen at certain price points. So we saw this big jump here recently. And we saw that in the 13F filings, actually, which I've talked about. But the important thing to note here, it's not necessarily going to push the price up. I wouldn't predict that to do so or say that's 100% going to happen. However, what it does is bring stability to the price at certain points. And then so I don't know if institutions are going to flip-flop on us and, offload shares all of a sudden because of something that happens. But at least my philosophy when it comes to institutional ownership, it becomes more of a bedrock of support, not necessarily the thing that pushes the stock up. It might do it on certain days there, and that's important to note. However, I don't necessarily think that institutions were putting in huge orders at 21 80 or 2170 that happened a few days ago early in the week. So that's just my thoughts on S&P, but it is, when it happens and it's announced, I think that's amazing, because what that also does mean, it means that for other institutions that need to invest or park money, sometimes it's as simple as, we need to see if this company is reputable enough to even be considered. And if they're in the S&P, then that's another check mark for them. Same with GAAP profitability, actually. So certain organizations, just because of the risk factor of it, and of course they have a lot of money here, maybe to an individual investor, it doesn't necessarily matter, and they're willing to take on that extra higher valuation because they know they'll become profitable. And it was pretty obvious with Palantir. However, I think for institutions, right, they have to be conservative with their money. They have to deal with reporting, and they have clients. So that's a different story. And so S&P 500 is still important here, but the amount that it's going to change for the company, I don't necessarily know or care. But we'll talk about what happens over time, especially when there's an official announcement, and I don't know when that's going to happen, especially with F-Class being new and other candidates. I know Bank of America also said, I think they brought up Uber as the example, but other candidates more likely to be entered into the S&P before Palantir. But it doesn't mean that they'll never get in, right? We've already got the check marks, which is awesome. Now another kind of what's next catalyst is important. So this is what a lot of folks have talked about. Bank of America also talked about it too with the Titan program. So the significance of Titan is that, and I don't necessarily have anything up here for this. I'm just going to kind of talk about it. But for the Titan program, the big thing about that is that it's tying in together the United States military. And this is through technology, right? So you have the different branches. You have the Army, Navy, Air Force, I guess Coast Guard too. You don't want to leave them out. But different branches of the military. And then let's just say there's a lot of levers at play at the same time, and technology is going to be that unifying ribbon that hopefully Palantir and alongside, I believe, Northam Gun Rep, I always have to mess up their name there, but essentially alongside them in bringing this program out. And this is important, of course, geopolitically for the United States, and it's going to be a priority no matter, honestly, which presidency or what party is in power. And for the United States military, our commercial power has to be defended with our military power. And you could even say it's a inverse relationship as well, with our commercial power can defend our military power as well. But the importance here for tying in, if Palantir is that unifying ribbon and then they extend this out to allies, I know that there's been talks about them doing this with the IDF in Israel, possibly some kind of notes about it in Ukraine, and this might be testing of certain parts of Titan, as well as just the whole business of tying things together. And I should probably just share something here, at least. Titan, a U.S. Army. Basically, it's a very big program that Palantir will be important to do, because we've seen their edge AI taking place, and I put that B-roll there. I love it. Honestly, it looks awesome. But it essentially ties into what Titan is trying to do. And with the amount of drones that has been used in the Russia-Ukraine war, and this is supposed to happen in coordination with satellites, ground units, air units as well, and then even just foot soldiers on the ground. The significance of Palantir, and even with their HoloLens here, I know this one's probably more of a stretch, not a HoloLens, but for the augmented reality that they recently released, this is going to be huge in terms of at least the potential of what it's going to do in embedding themselves further into the United States military, but also the size of the money here. Of course, there's going to be some sort of split with all the other vendors. It's such a big project, but I think this is probably going to be the biggest possibly unexpected, because we don't necessarily know how much and to the extent, catalyst for Palantir, because we already know S&P, and you can even argue institutions have been buying into this, and as we can see, they have accelerated their purchasing of shares. So the amount of pricing in, we don't necessarily know, but I think for Titan, no one's necessarily saying I'm buying now because I know exactly what Titan is going to do for Palantir, and Palantir is going to win it. So I think when it comes to, and this doesn't necessarily even tie to this specific program here, when we're talking about other countries, so we still know the Russia-Ukraine war happening. I know it's unfortunate, civilians on both sides, and even for troops that don't necessarily support the cause on one side that I don't want to bring up. But yeah, certain projects here can come about, and I brought up last week's stream the White House collaboration in building up the industrial defense base for Ukraine. Now, the big thing about that is that doesn't mean that you're just building weapons or it has to deal directly with defense specifically, because there's a lot of things that are tying into that. That's can be simply as, oh, we got to rebuild your highways. Highways could be used by civilians, of course, but also I think the main reason a lot of countries like them is that tactically they need to move their troops around, and they need to move supplies around. And honestly, supply chains are going to be probably the bigger, so I'm not a geopolitical or military expert here, but supply chains might become maybe the most important thing that's going to happen as more drones become the norm in any warfare, and then maybe less troops on the ground until you've prepped the areas that you're going to storm. But essentially, there's a lot of things at play here when it comes to Palantir and the things that they're talking about. So I think that's what I wanted to end the stream on here. Let me just take a quick look at the chat. Thank you all for stopping by. I'm not sure why this doesn't update on the screen for me, but I do see here, when's the estimate listing change? Marines, bro. Yeah. But yeah, thank you all for stopping by. I appreciate everyone who stopped here. It looks like we had 80-something concurrent viewers. This is huge for the channel. I do love doing these Palantir live streams. Midwest, of course. Yeah, peace signs up. Peace signs up for you. Party on. But I'll end the stream here. Everyone, I hope you had a great holiday, at least if you're in the United States, or if you just enjoyed your weekend, if you didn't have the holiday. And I'll see you in next week's live stream and throughout all the daily Palantir videos. I think I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it actually after the goodbye. So hopefully the people who would get mad at this or are gone. But essentially, I do have merch. Actually, it's through print to order, so I do not make this stuff myself, honestly, here. But I did have some stuff ordered for myself as well. I got a hat and a hoodie. But if you are interested, I do actually have a shop here. It's on my spread shop, but it's also linked through my YouTube channel. So if you're interested in it, please do not feel obligated. I'm not trying to force this on anyone. I did it at the very end here, so I'm trying to do it at least ideal as possible. So I think I'll close off on that note here. If you want to support the channel and getting merch and want to show off the Palantir Research logo, I think it's pretty cool. I need a new hat anyway, so I got one there. I'm going to rep it. And if someone asks me about it, it'll be interesting. So maybe it'll be a great Christmas gift for the family and friends. So just let them know. Check out Palantir Research. Just kidding, right? But yeah, I'd like to end the stream on that. Thank you all, and I'll see you in the next one.